Welcome to the Bite-Sized Bible, where we look at the Bible from a literary point of view and seek to understand the story the Bible is telling. We have been making our way through the book of Exodus. Last episode, we saw how Moses was called by God at the burning bush to go to Pharaoh and tell them to let the Hebrews free.
We're on a mission from God.
Moses reunites with his brother Aaron, and they both carry out the task together. But they fail, and Pharaoh tells them, "I do not know your God, and I will not set the Hebrews free. In fact, I'm doubling their workload." It was after that we finally learn God's name and what his name means. He is the God of the Hebrews past, present, and future. And he is going to act against the Egyptians in order to set his people free. The overarching narrative theme that we've been discussing is God's desire to be with his people. And today's episode is about how God is trying to set them free and break the resolve of the Egyptians. The plagues of Egypt. But before we get to the plagues, there's a little bit of stage setting we need to go over. God tells Moses and Aaron to once again go before Pharaoh and tell him to let his people go. But God gives him a warning. "And the Lord said to Moses, 'See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my hosts, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the people of Israel from among them." One of the things that has confused many readers of this book is the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. And the reason for that is that it's not a very good translation for what is actually said in the Hebrew. Because in the Hebrew, more times than not, it uses the word chazak, which means to strengthen. People often ask the question, why would God harden Pharaoh's heart? But the truth is, throughout the plagues, God only does it about half the time. For the other half of them, Pharaoh hardens his own heart. But also that word chazak, which means strengthen, implies something important. Pharaoh's resolve is being strengthened. Because remember, Pharaoh is incredibly prideful and arrogant and views himself as a god. He is in charge here. So when Moses and Aaron constantly keep coming back saying, "Let my people go," or all these horrible things are going to happen, Pharaoh believes he is still in charge. He is a god among men. Who is their God to him? He strengthens his resolve to not set the Hebrews free, and it blinds him to the destruction that he causes. Check out here what the Apostle Paul says in his opening to the letter to the Romans. "And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done." Same kind of thing happened with Pharaoh. He kept hardening his heart, kept strengthening his resolve, and eventually, God just turned him over to his desires. Moses and Aaron go to appear before Pharaoh, and this time, they come with some signs and wonders. Aaron casts down his staff before Pharaoh, and his staff becomes a serpent, just like how God told Moses to do back at the burning bush. But Pharaoh's own personal magicians are able to replicate this trick. They throw down their own staffs, and they also become serpents. But the snake that was Aaron's staff eats the snakes of the Egyptians. They did this sign because God commanded them that it would show the Egyptians the power of God, and that they would believe that the God of the Hebrews has in fact come down. But the magical act performed by Pharaoh's magicians is sort of like the gods of Egypt versus the God of the Hebrews, which we will explore much later in the plagues. But Rashi, who was an 11th century Jewish rabbi, taught and believed that all magic performed within the Torah was genuine magic, and not just some smoke and mirrors or sleight of hand. The New Testament even speaks of magicians being able to perform incredible acts, namely Simon Magus in the book of Acts. Both traditional Jewish and Christian teachings teach that magical acts are performed by tapping into the spiritual realm, and more specifically, tapping into the power of demonic entities. Here's a whole list of places you can check out information on that. Moses and Aaron called on the power of God to turn their staff into a serpent, but the Egyptian magicians called on their gods to turn their staves into serpents. And within Jewish Christian teaching, these gods of the Egyptians would have been viewed as demons. Again, here's some more places you can check out information for yourself. But still, Pharaoh will not let the Hebrews free. So now God is going to send judgment against the Egyptians in the forms of plagues until Pharaoh releases the Hebrews. The purpose of the plagues was twofold. One, show the Hebrews how powerful God is, because they have been slaves for generations. It's been generations since the death of Joseph. They really don't know God as well as their forefathers did. They know the stories of their forefathers, but they have never personally experienced God. So God has to show himself to the Hebrews. And the second thing is that God needs to show the Egyptians his power, because the Egyptians are polytheists. They have deities over all different aspects of creation, but God is the one God over all of creation, and he is going to show them just that. Take a look at this verse from Exodus chapter 12, just before the 10th and final plague is given. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. God's going to execute judgment on the gods of Egypt. So let's talk about how the plagues are a judgment on the gods of Egypt. A couple things about the plagues before we get into them. They were almost all warned to Pharaoh except one. The Hebrews were spared from all the plagues and were not affected by them. But now let's explore how the plagues of Egypt are a judgment on Egypt's gods, because each plague actually corresponds with an Egyptian deity. And to understand this point, we're going to learn a little bit of Egyptian mythology as we go through the plagues. The first plague was that of the Nile River turning to blood, the source of Egypt's agricultural prowess. And there's a twofold explanation for this. Number one is that this is against the god Hapi, who in Egyptian mythology is the god of the Nile and is said to be the creator of the Nile River. God said he would execute judgment on the gods of Egypt. The other thing that makes this important as being the first plague is that the book of Exodus, if you remember, opened with a scene of genocide against the Hebrew baby boys. They were thrown into the Nile after being born and drowned at the decree of Pharaoh. So the Nile turning to blood could also be seen as the blood of the Hebrew baby boys coming back to haunt the new Pharaoh. The blood of the Hebrew baby boys is crying out just as the blood of Abel's when Cain killed him. But the Egyptian magicians were able to replicate turning water into blood. And so Pharaoh saw this as a silly little trick, and his heart was hardened. The second plague is the plague of frogs. And frogs in Egyptian mythology are seen as a symbol of fertility, specifically attributed to the goddess Heket, who is depicted with a frog's head and is the goddess of fertility. But the Egyptian magicians are able to replicate this one also and can summon frogs. The frogs are all over the place in Egypt. They are everywhere. They're jumping on your table, into your bed, on your porch, in the streets, in the roofs. They are becoming a nuisance. And so Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, I can turn off the plague. Just tell me when you would like me to do it. And Pharaoh says, do it tomorrow. Why would Pharaoh wait a whole day to call off the frogs that are probably swarming all around him as he's talking with Moses and jumping off his shoulder and onto his face? Why would he put this off for a whole nother day? Because Pharaoh's pride and ego is getting in the way. He still thinks he's in control and can tell Moses when to turn off the plague. So he sets the time. The third plague is that of the plague of lice, and this is against the Egyptian god Geb, who is the god of the ground, or the dust. And the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth, so that it may become gnats in all the land of Egypt. The Egyptian magicians could not replicate this, and further on throughout the rest of the plagues, they cannot replicate anything else. The magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. Even Pharaoh's own magicians are starting to realize there is a stronger force at play here. We are 3 plagues in, and in a polytheistic mindset, whenever some kind of calamity or natural disaster occurs, that means you've angered that one particular god. Like the Nile turning to blood, oh, we angered the Nile god. The frogs, oh, we angered the frog god. The lice, we angered the lice god, or the dust god, the earth god. But for multiple deities to simultaneously be mad at you is mind-shattering in the polytheistic worldview, especially as we get to one plague in particular. Plague number 4 is the plague of flies, and this is against the Egyptian god Shu, who is the god of the air. And if you remember from last episode, Moses and Aaron tried to strike a deal with Pharaoh saying that they would leave for just 3 days to go and worship their god. It is now after this 4th plague that Pharaoh comes with a counteroffer. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, "Go sacrifice to your God within the land." But Moses said, "It would not be right to do so, for the offerings we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God are an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he tells us." So Pharaoh said, "I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only you must not go very far away. Plead for me." What did Moses mean by the sacrifices they're bringing to God are abominable to the Egyptians? Well, the animal they were going to sacrifice was a lamb, sheep, and the Egyptians worship sheep. But Pharaoh gives them a counter offer, and they don't take it, because it's not what God commanded. God commanded a full release of the Hebrews, not a partial release where they're still in the land of Egypt. God is getting them out of there.
Deal or no deal?
The 5th plague is the death of all of the Egyptian livestock. This is against the goddess Hathor, who is the goddess of love, and is depicted with a cow's head. The 6th plague, boils. This is against the goddess Isis, who is the goddess of healing. She is also a high-ranking Egyptian deity. As from this plague going forward, we move from some of the lesser gods to some of the higher gods, like Isis. The 7th plague is that of hail and fire. Now, the Bible is really interesting in how it words this. At least in the Hebrew, it states that within the ball of ice that was the hail, fire was inside of it. Put yourself back into that polytheistic mindset. The ice god and the fire god are both angry at us at the same time. 2 diametrically opposed forces of nature, fire and ice. This would have just been mind-blowing to the Egyptians. And it's because it was directly against their god, Set, who is a part of the greater Egyptian pantheon, and was the brother-in-law to Isis, the goddess who the last plague was about. Set is said to be the god of storms, and is also seen as their evil god. Other mythologies around the world have a sort of evil god, just like the Greeks have Hades, the Romans have Pluto, the Norse have Loki. It's not an uncommon trope amongst the mythologies of the world to have an evil deity. The 8th plague is that of locusts. We've already had the death of all the livestock, hail and fire has just rained down. The infrastructure and agriculture of Egypt is being wiped out by these events. And this plague of locusts is specifically against Osiris, who is normally seen as the god of the dead, but he's also an agricultural deity along with Bastet. And he is a very high-ranking deity in the Egyptian pantheon, as his brother is Set from the last plague, and his wife is Isis from 2 plagues ago. But after the death of the livestock and the hail and the fire destroying a lot of the infrastructure, the locusts come through the land of Egypt and take what's left. There's nothing left in their fields. Then Pharaoh's servants said to him, "How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined?" Pharaoh's own servants are telling him, give it up. Stop playing this game and hardening your heart. It's blinding you to the damage that you're causing by not letting them just leave. But Pharaoh's pride and his ego and his strengthening of his resolve is causing all of this. If only he would just let go and repent, then the rest of this would not have to happen. The ninth plague, darkness. Darkness consumes the land of Egypt. And the Bible describes that this is a darkness that can be felt. What does it mean by that? Well, have you ever been in a dark room or a dark building where it's pitch black and it just feels eerie? Like there's something watching you in the darkness, but you know nothing's there? And it kind of fills the room around you, and you don't want to move or look around. It's quiet. It's still. But it's also terrifying, because you don't know what's there in the darkness. You feel the darkness. For those of you who know a little bit of Egyptian mythology, the connection to the Egyptian pantheon here probably is obvious. It's against their sun god, Ra, who is one of the highest ranking Egyptian deities, being the father of the previous three gods, Osiris, Isis, and Set. Moses goes before Pharaoh one last time to request that the Hebrews be set free. But here's what happens. Then Pharaoh said to him, "Get away from me. Take care never to see my face again, for on the day that you see my face, you shall die." Moses said, "As you say, I will not see your face again." This brings us to the 10th and final plague. This one was not warned to Pharaoh. Moses didn't go to Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go, or this bad thing will happen," before the 10th plague. Instead, God just told Moses to tell the people to take a lamb, kill it, and to take the blood from the lamb and mark every lintel and doorpost of their homes with it. Because that night the Lord would pass through the land of Egypt, but when he sees the blood on their door, he will pass over them, and the plague will not enter. The Lord said to Moses, "Yet one plague more I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterward he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will drive you away completely." The Hebrews mark their doors. They get inside. And the night comes, and it's quiet. And God moves through the land of Egypt. And as he does, he has a targeted mission. He's seeking out every firstborn child of Egypt and taking their lives. This is the death of the firstborn. This 10th and final plague left a mass of death throughout the land of Egypt. But God actually said he was going to do this as his last resort several chapters ago when Moses was on his way back to Egypt. "Then you shall say to Pharaoh, 'Thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. And I say to you, let my son go that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son.'" When the people of Egypt awoke in the morning, they found the dead all over the place, in their beds, in their homes, in their streets. And a great cry was heard in Egypt, such as never has been heard before, nor ever will be heard again. And Pharaoh finally let the Hebrews go. The Hebrews are finally free. They are leaving Egypt. And they commemorate the day that they left Egypt with a holiday every single year to be remembered. Passover, the holiday where we read from the Haggadah and retell the story of the Exodus every year. And the reason they wanted to always remember this day was not just because of how God moved in their lives and set them free, but because this was a story they wanted to pass down from generation to generation. And when your children say to you, "What do you mean by this service?" you shall say, "It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, for he passed over the house of the people of Israel in Egypt, when he struck the Egyptians but spared our houses, and the people bowed their heads and worshipped. Just as Rabbi Gamliel said, each person should see himself as if they personally walked out of Egypt, because it's a story of salvation from slavery and sin to freedom and newness of life with God. And the Hebrews were saved the exact same way we were, by the blood of a lamb and the power of God. The Egyptians were urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, "We shall all be dead." So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls being bound up in their cloaks on their shoulders. The people of Israel had also done as Moses told them, for they had asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have what they asked. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. 600,000 people left the land of Egypt that day. And they took the bones of Joseph with them. They're on their way to the promised land. They walk for 7 days to the border of the Red Sea. Like and subscribe for part 4.